In Zanzibar's busy Arab market, the rattling of coffee cups is the familiar street cry of the Cossacks. Coffee was popular in this part of the world long before it was known in Europe. There are many stories about the discovery of coffee, but none more colorful than the legend of the dancing goats. In the land of Yemen, near the Red Sea, there stood a monastery called Shehodet, built to the glory of Allah. The monastery employed a goat herd. One day, the goat herd was very puzzled. What could be the cause of this strange behavior? Could it have something to do with the bright red berries on a nearby bush? The goat herd broke off a small branch laden with berries and made his way to the monastery to tell his story to the Immam. Now the Immam knew full well that goat herds were notorious storytellers, and he resolved to put it to the test. He boiled some water and threw in some of the kernels of the berries. He tried some of the brew. Then he knew that he had stumbled upon a rival to the magic of wine, for he seemed to have a new strength and energy. And so he served it to his monks to keep them awake during their midnight prayers. And in the monastery of Shehodet, the monks gave the bitter black drink the name of kave, meaning stimulating and invigorating. The idea spread beyond the borders of Arabia, and the custom of making a drink from the dried berries moved on to the Near East and Africa, and later to Turkey. It was several hundred years before coffee drinking spread to Europe. The first coffee house in London was opened in 1652 and was called the Pasqua's Head. But the 18th century was the great coffee house era. All over town they were found, the gossip shops and information centers of the age. They were open to any man, rich or poor, who paid his penny to the girl sitting at the bar. She was the original barmaid, and she collected the small silver coins that were the pennies of the time. That's how coffee houses acquired the name penny universities. Payment of a penny signified acceptance of the rules of the house. Such rules allowed visitors to sit next to anybody they chose, regardless of rank or station, and engage them in conversation. Literary men flocked to the coffee houses, and a tremendous impetus was given to English writing in the early Georgian era. The coffee was served without milk and was very strong, stimulating conversation. Despite the fact that coffee houses were entirely democratic, certain houses gradually attracted members of a particular department of commerce. There were no clubs in those days. The shipping fraternity met in the famous Lloyds, for instance. Stockbrokers frequented Jonathan's in Change Alley, which led to the founding of the Stock Exchange. From Arabia, the Arabs introduced coffee growing to East Africa as early as the 17th century. Small crops were grown on the islands of Zanzibar and Pemba, but these attempts were not successful. On the western shores of Lake Victoria, coffee is said to have been grown as far back as 1862. This variety was probably introduced from Abyssinia. Coffee was not drunk. The berries were eaten as a food in those days. Coffee was first grown commercially in East Africa by the mission fathers of St. Austin's near Nairobi in 1900. Today, a school stands on the site of the old mission. Some of the original plants are still growing and bear fruit every year. From this early work of the mission fathers, a great industry grew up. By 1914, there were 6,000 acres under coffee in Kenya, and in 1957, the figure stood at 71,000 acres. The type of coffee known as Arabica thrives in a temperate climate, and in East Africa this is found between 4,000 and 6,000 feet above sea level. During the first 4 years after planting, the bushes produce only a small number of berries, which are discarded in order to make a stronger crop for the future. When mature, the bushes can flower twice in 1 year, giving 2 crops, but this depends on the local rains. After flowering, it takes 8 months for the berries to become ripe enough for picking. With the rainy season starting in March, the main crop should be ready from November onwards. The berries on the bush do not ripen all at once, so mechanical picking cannot be used. The picker selects only the ripest fruit on the bush. Coffee grown in Kenya is mostly Arabica, and this finds particular favor in the United Kingdom, Germany, and the United States. A good picker can collect 150 pounds of berries in one day. After the foreman has weighed each load, the pickers are given tickets. These tickets are exchanged for money at the end of the day. The rate of pay is related to the previous year's coffee prices. The sacks are then loaded up and taken to the pulping plant. The employees live on the coffee estates or chambers. The housing and the schools are often provided by the employer. We've seen how the coffee is grown on the larger. An increasing number of Africans are growing their own coffee on a smaller scale. As the African chambers are smaller, the farmers in one area pool their crops for pulping and milling. The group payment is shared out among the farmers. In Uganda, the type of coffee grown is called Robusta. This coffee is usually sun-dried while still in the cherry, and is then taken to the curing mills. Robusta is more suited to the lower altitude and higher rainfall in the territory, and has recently overtaken cotton as Uganda's largest export. Robusta is widely used in the production of the popular instant coffees. When Arabica coffee has been picked, it comes to the pulping plant for processing. From the hoppers, the coffee goes to the pulping machines. At this stage, the coffee is in the form of a cherry-like fruit. Inside are the actual beans, usually 2 in each cherry, surrounded by a pulpy layer. This layer is of no value and is removed by the pulping machine and discarded. The beans are next carried along to the fermenting tanks, where they stay for a period of between 36 and 72 hours. When fermentation is complete, the beans are taken to be washed. The coffee is then fed into a pump and pumped up to the drying tables. The water is drained off, and the beans are spread out on tables to dry in the sun. After drying, the beans are sacked, weighed, and dispatched to the curing mills. More than 200,000 tons of coffee are carried over the railways of East Africa in the course of a year.
Here at at the mills, we have a task which calls for a lot of organizing. Our job is complicated because the coffee is not sold until it has been through the mill, and so each farmer's load must be kept separate during the milling processes. The beans are fed to this large machine. First, a shaker removes any rubbish that may have found its way into the sacks, and then the beans are cleaned. Each bean is still encased in a husk known as a parchment, and these husks are removed by a device called a huller. The beans emerge from the machine after being mechanically graded. Now, although most of the grading is done mechanically, some grades are hand-sorted to remove pods similar in shape and size. From any one consignment sent to the mills, grading can produce 8 different categories according to the size and weight of the beans. Samples of each grade are sent to what is called the liquoring department for report. Here, samples of the various grades are roasted and prepared for the taster. After tasting the coffee on the pallet and inspecting the raw samples, the liquorers can assess the general quality, which is quoted as a figure between 1 and 14 for payment purposes. The marketing board pay the farmer a basic price. Should the eventual average selling price exceed this, the farmer gets an additional payment. Parcels of different grades are assembled for auctioning, and a catalogue is drawn up listing grade, number of bags, and weight. Coffee auctions are held in various parts of East Africa. In Nairobi, an auction takes place every week during the season, and it is not unusual for nearly 1,000 tons to come under the hammer at a single auction. Coffee is auctioned at so many shillings per hundredweight.
400, I gotta sell it, 468. Right, lot 25. A grade, 35 bags, give me a bid. Give me a bid. 420, 425, 26, 427, 428, 429, 30, 32, 433, 4, 35, right at the back, 36, 37, against you in the front, 37, I'm selling at 38.
Another new development is the action of cooperative schemes in the 3 territories, mainly run by African organizations. The cooperative groups contribute sums of money to run schools and training colleges, like this one, the College of Commerce at Moshi in Tanganyika, where the students receive general commercial training. As we've seen, coffee is an important crop in all the 3 territories of East Africa. Uganda produced the greatest tonnage. In 1957, Uganda produced 84,000 tons, mainly of Robusta coffee, the exportable value of which was £21.5 million. In the same year, Kenya produced 20,800 tons of Arabica coffee, worth £10.75 million, and Tanganyika in the same year produced 19,300 tons, almost equally divided between Arabica and Robusta, worth just over £7 million. Today, an increasing proportion of the world's best coffee comes from Africa. It is in great demand in countries as widely separated as Australia, the United States, Germany, Holland, Canada, and Great Britain. Coffee first became popular because it stimulated the mind and encouraged conversation. In fact, in those days, it was credited with far greater powers. As this advertisement that appeared in the Public Advisor of May the 19th, 1657 suggests.
In Bartholomew's Lane, on the backside of the old exchange, the drink called coffee, which is a very wholesome and physical drink, having many excellent virtues, closes the orifice of the stomach, fortifies the heat within, helpeth digestion, quickeneth the spirits, maketh the heart lightsome, is good against eye sores, coughs or colds, rheums, consumptions, headaches, dropsy, gout, scurvy, king's evil, and many others, is to be sold both in the morning and at 3 o'clock in the constipations, headaches, dropsy, gout, scurvy, king's evil, and many others, is to be sold both in the morning and at 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
Today, this advertisement appears on the back of the menu of the Kenya coffee houses in London, although it's not suggested that since then its claims have been substantiated. Coffee houses like this have become increasingly popular in London, in Nairobi, in fact, in all parts of the world. People gather in them to meet their friends, to discuss the latest play or film, or to try and solve the world's problems. And so we find that history is repeating itself, and the famous coffee houses of 2 centuries ago have returned in modern form to serve the new age.